Hey guys, Postron here, and today let's talk about my Explosive Arrow Ballista Elementalist. So this is a build that we tried out over on my live stream on twitch.tv/Postron over the last few days, and at first I kind of got talked into doing it, so it was a little weird. I wasn't really sure where this would go. A lot of people play the hit-based version. When I did some POBing, it seemed to me like the Ignite version had some distinct advantages, so I just wanted to try it out, and in the end I was extremely surprised by how good this actually was. If I had to compare this to the Wintertide that I tried out, which was like okay to decent, and the Explosive Trapper, which was really, really good. This definitely excels in different things, but overall, this is, I think, my pick for now that I would choose. But then again, disclaimer here right at the start, this is not a build guide. I'm making a build guide once I have 3.17 nodes out. I will update all of these builds that we're trying out. This is only testing, so just to point that out, so that we can assess once 3.17 comes out if this is still good, if it maybe got buffed, it got nerfed. Who knows what's going to happen? Let's get into the build. So first up, let's talk about Explosive Arrow as a skill. Basically, what this skill does is it fires an arrow, which can then land on an enemy, and it kind of sticks a fuse into that enemy, which would look something like this, right? I put it out of my ballistas right now, so I'm just shooting it. We have like fuses, and if there was an enemy here, then it would get those fuses stuck into them. And the thing is, these fuses stack. So by themselves, the fuses have a duration. So what that means is right now, this has a duration, a base duration of 1 second. You can increase that duration, you can reduce that duration. And all this means is that in that second, from the first fuse onward, you have time to apply more and more fuses. And at the end of that duration, for every fuse in there, you will get a damage bonus on the explosion at the end. So if we think about how this would work, right, it would be wise to have a lot of attack speed so it can apply as much fuses as possible. The thing is, this is actually kept at 20, maximum 20 explosive arrows stuck in an enemy. But basically, the challenge should be for the build to abuse those stacking mechanics as good as possible without reducing your duration too much. So you'd rather get more attack speed than delaying this part where you can stick in fuses, because as you can imagine, if we increase the duration to like 3 seconds, it would be kind of awkward while mapping, because everything it takes like 3 seconds before it actually explodes. So we'd rather just have faster attacks than actually like having to wait there forever. Now, some of you will already have caught why Ballistas is actually so good with it. A lot of people in these kind of builds, especially when they're self-cast, right? They're kind of, or self-attacking, right? You're kind of forced into a high attack speed weapon like a Quill Rain or a Storm Cloud or whatever, just to get to those 20 fusing stacks. It's really, really hard to actually apply it other than maybe mines or traps or any like that, which are made to apply a lot of hits, right? So just casting it yourself is really not the way to go. But here's the thing, ballistas do work around that really nicely because you can stack a lot of totems. Straight up. In this build, we have 6 totems at a time. So that's what we're going to do. Right now, I can't do them because I have a life tap. So this is how it's going to look like, right? So we have 6 totems in total. And that means that we will be able to apply a lot more fuses, right? Which is pretty cute. Obviously, now you could say this has a less attack speed multiplier, right? It has straight up 50% less. But if you think about it, we still have 6 totems. So that's still 3 times as many fuses as I would have when I would attack myself. And there's obviously a lot more advantages to ballistas other than having a safer playstyle, right? And also the ballistas auto-targeting, which is huge. And also just the fact that you will always have fuses on your enemy is huge, because obviously we're talking about a skill that has a high damage range, right? So it goes from 579 to 868. That means that sometimes it's going to hit 579, right? Obviously this gets multiplied by all the stacks, but let's just for a second imagine. Sometimes we hit 579, that's not going to be as big of an ignite, but since they are proccing and proccing and proccing the fuses, you will get a very high average usually. Now you might be asking to yourself, well, how can I determine then what the right amount of attack speed is? Because obviously you can only get up to 20 fuses on an enemy. So if I have too much attack speed, that won't get me anywhere. If I'm applying 30 fuses, I still have the same damage as 20. So I would like to reallocate that attack speed into something else, right? How can I actually calculate that? Now, to make understanding this a little bit easier, don't run away here. This is actually not as hard as it looks like on the first view here. Basically, all you do is you have the amount of your totems, because that is the amount of fuses that is going to be applied per shot, right? Times your attack rate. So for example, in this current POB, we have 2.13 attacks, right? So you do times 2.13, right? Because that's how many are going to be applied per second. But it's not just 1 second that the duration is, because if you have some sort of other duration modifiers, which we have like 15% increased, then you're going to have to actually multiply that again times 1.15. And if we do that, right, then at the end we have +6, which we're going to come to in a second. I think the first part is pretty easy to understand, right? 6 times 2.13. And then times 1.15, and we get to this number here. Now you might say, Palstron, this fucking sucks because this is not enough fuses per second. And this is where I made the mistake and I actually got corrected by Crouching Tuna here. He actually told me that it's obviously, you also have to add the amount of totems to it, +6. The fuses only start ticking the duration once the first fuse is applied, right? And it starts when all the ballistas at the same time fire their first fuse, right? So the enemy starts the duration off with 6 fuses already, which then basically means that you actually only have to get 14 fuses in the rest and in the duration of the time frame. So if we do that, we have +6 here and we have a good 20.6, actually a little bit too much. But I'm going to tell you there's a few caveats to this, so overcapping is actually pretty good. Number one, if you think about it, right, this isn't actually going to apply 20 stacks if you just have them up all the time. It's actually more going to be 18 stacks because it applies 6, right? Then 6 again, so 12, and then 6 again, so 18. And at that point, we do not have enough to get to the 24 mark here, right? So if we actually wanted 20 fuses, we would have to get to 24 in a perfect scenario. But after some testing, we would have to get a lot of attack speed to get to 24, and I didn't really deem it necessary because the reality is most of the time, it's not going to be a sterile case like this where everything's perfectly upright. One of your totems will die. Maybe you place one incorrectly and the boss is here and it can't fire at it, right? So you only have 5 totems. So everything goes to shit, right? So usually what will happen is it will be somewhere around like 18 to 20 fuses, but it's going to be a little bit more complicated than that. I just want to point out how you can kind of see if you're in the ballpark, but if you're in like the 2 second to 2.2 second attack rate, you're probably good. Also, once again, do note that the quality of explosive arrow actually increases the duration of this gem, which you might not actually want if you have fast enough attack speed. Like I said, the more duration you have, the longer it takes to proc, so it's going to be very awkward while clearing. I would actually like the 20% duration because then I could remove this one here, and it would basically mean I would save a passive point and just increase the duration by a little bit, which wouldn't really hurt the build. Now, something I get asked a lot is why I'm actually using Elemental Equilibrium, and it might seem a little bit bad. It might seem like it's not up a lot, but I will explain why. Let's first go over what this actually does. Hits that deal elemental damage remove exposure to those elements and inflict exposure to other elements. So what this means in essence is that if a hit has lightning damage and only lightning damage and hits an enemy, it gets exposure to cold and fire until something else hits it again and maybe overrides that. And all the exposure does in this case is -25 to those resistances. So for example, like I just said, if I hit with lightning damage, the enemy will get -25 to cold and to fire. So you might be confused here. How the hell could we use that with explosive arrow? Because it clearly says there that it has added fire damage and we cannot convert that into anything, right? So what are we exactly doing? Well, it turns out the way this actually works is that explosive arrow does have a hit part from each of these arrows that are being applied with the fuses, right? So if we shoot here, these arrows not only stick a fuse in the enemy, but if you have any sort of added damage, they will apply that added damage. And that's the base damage that you see up there, the attack damage, 100% of base. As long as you do not have any fire damage on any of your gear, only the explosion gets the added fire damage. Your initial arrow, there's nothing here about your initial arrow having fire damage. So as long as you don't have any fire damage on your anywhere basically, you're good. You won't apply fire exposure until the big hit. But the thing is, right, if we think about this, so we stick fuses into an enemy, right, until it explodes. Now, before that, it has fire exposure, right? But after that, it hits with fire, so it doesn't have fire exposure anymore. Now, at that point, though, the ballistas will just keep firing, and immediately that fire exposure will be activated again. So with that being said, you have probably around 80 to 90% uptime on this. I tested it out. It actually works like a charm. Now, what some of you guys will think next is, well, okay, so that works, but what about this part of Shaper of Flames? 25% more damage with ignites you inflict with hits for which the highest type of damage is fire, right? You might say that doesn't go with each other, right? Because if we're not hitting with fire, we're not getting the 25% more damage. But the thing is, the arrow has no fire damage, right? So that wouldn't get the 25% more damage. Your explosion, which is not there to proc Elemental Equilibrium, right? That part has the fire damage. So that one still gets the 25% more multiplier, basically making this skill perfect for elemental equilibrium, making it so you get the 25% more damage from having a lot of fire damage while having no fire damage. Also, something that might be confusing for some people that's actually really important to know about totems if you don't already. When it comes to stuff like on-kill effects, right? Usually totems aren't you, so you don't get the buffs. But if the totem applies a damage over time and that damage over time kills the enemy, you actually get kill credit for that. Which means that you can get onslaught on kill from ignite totems, as well as this bow mastery down here, which gives you phasing and movement speed while phasing. Just want to throw this out there, really important, don't get confused by these items. Now, as for defenses, at the start, I actually wanted to go for iron reflexes. But one thing about bow builds is that they have no shield, right? They don't have any block. So if I don't go for any evasion at all, I have 0 avoidance, which means every single hit will hit me, right? Actually, which is terrible, right? So the way evasion works after the new calculation, if you just get like 10,000 evasion, which isn't really hard, you won't get hit 50% of the time. So in the end, I actually decided against iron reflexes, and I went for like a hybrid setup with grace and determination and defiance banner. So with my current gear, which is pretty crappy, right? If I press my buttons, I press the 2 and I press the space. If I look at my defenses, I have 21k armor and 19k evasion, which is more than enough for most content. This actually feels extremely good. And on top of that, we're also stacking spell suppression. We have a little bit on the tree, but mostly we're going for it on gear. Now, the thing about getting spell suppression on gear early, this might seem like a really sad item to you. But the thing is, I would love to get dot multi, right? But it's just not realistic. If you want spell suppression, you will not get spell suppression and dot multi. It's impossible at Leaguestart, basically. If you want those items, right? For example, right, the boots, spell suppression, we're not going to have anything else fancy on here. It's not going to happen. So in the end, if you want to go for spell suppression, you're going to be way tankier. You're also going to have Mage Bane right here, which helps a ton. But if you opt for that, you're going to lose around about 20-25% of your damage. Just be aware of that. To show you how this build actually plays in maps and how it bosses, I prepared a little bit of a Drox here. This is A8. Yep. A8. So let's get into it real quick. I'm going to explain how this works. What are your buttons, right? So your main button here is obviously the explosive ballistas. And the way you're going to play this is you're probably just going to Quicksilver, place, go, place, go. You don't have to do anything other than that during your mapping process. And while mapping, you'll always have phasing. You'll always have onslaught because you're always killing. So other than that, what are your buttons? Now, I don't really have that many. You can add more. You can have stuff like Flame Ball. But honestly, stuff like Flame Ball is very deceptive in terms of POB damage because not always all the projectiles shoot through it. So it's just weird. Also, Flame Ball doesn't work with EE, right? So definitely be aware of that. Just don't do Flame Ball at all, I guess, if you're running that. And yeah, so number one thing against bosses, we throw down Flame Surge Trap and the Frenzy. So this is the Flame Surge Trap. Now, you don't want to throw down the trap before the boss actually spawns. If it's like a phased boss, you don't want to throw it down and wait for the boss because it's not going to be ignited when it triggers. It has to first be ignited, so the ignite gets consumed and you get the Flame Surge debuff on the enemy. And number one, what you're going to start with is put your ballistas down, then you start frenzying it until you have max frenzy, which in this case is free, right? And then you also have applied the flammability because that's linked to the frenzy with Hex Touch. And then at some point you throw down the trap, which isn't that big of a deal. It's not always going to be up. I don't have any sort of damage for it in POB, but it is kind of like 25% more damage when it's up. But as I said, it's not always up. So let's just get into the playstyle here. Also on our left click, we have Molten Shell. It's always going to be cast. Now our spells, our skills are basically going to be you don't have to have any mana regen or anything of that sort. And as you can see, since we're stacking both evasion and armor, we're pretty tanky. Also spell suppression. We could just run through stuff, even if it's like, even if it's some of these nasty mobs, right? The Drox mobs. Actually, that was pretty stupid. But yeah, as you can see here, the Ignite Prolifs are actually massive. Now, you don't have to worry, right? The playstyle that you want to go for is definitely just place and go. You have dots behind you. Everything will die 100%. Like, I can run through here and show you. If you go back, everything here is dead, right? That's always how it happens. Because you have, like, Ignite Prolifs and pretty good duration as well. So they're going to keep being on the ground for, like, 4 seconds or something. So let's just find the boss real quick. And let's show you the single target damage. Now, compared to the other Leaguestart testing that I did, right? I did Wintertide Brand and Explosive Trap. Out of the free builds, I actually like this one the most. I would say Explosive Trap has a little bit better single target, but for an Ignite build, this has actually quite a good single target, as you will see. And in terms of clearing, this is like massively better than anything Explosive Trap could ever hope to achieve, right? So I guess it just depends on what you want, right? So now I can throw the trap, right? I threw the trap here, so it get a little bit of extra damage. So that's why I'm saying I'm not really calculating it. This guy's pretty much a beast, but we got him. And yeah, so now let's try the Drox real quick. We actually leveled up some stuff. Really nice. So let's see how Drox goes. Like I said, don't throw the trap down before. You want to throw it down once he got already ignited. So like 1 or 2 seconds in, right? So like here, I think the trap hit. I'm not sure. If it didn't, you just throw one again. Just make sure that your traps are always up. I hope I don't get one shot by some random attacks. Oh, he's already faced. Okay, so that's basically a single target. That's usually not something you see from an Ignite build. Usually Ignite builds are just good at like mapping and everything else is terrible. But as you can see here, this is actually quite legit. Just keep your totems up here. Now he's phased again. Just walk out of it. You can probably take it with the armor, but you might not, right? So as you can see here, stupidly easy to play with this. The Explosive Trapper has to be a little bit more careful because it actually has to stand there once it has to throw more traps, right? So you're more prone to being hit. But with this, you just place and you run around like a chicken, right? So I really love this build. So far, this is my favorite of the builds we tried out. Next up, let's talk about the Ascendancy. And when it comes to Ballista builds, the #1 question will always be, why the hell are you not a Hierophant, right? And I will explain real quickly why. So if you look at Hierophant, we're not a crit build, right? So these nodes here, the endurance charges are still good, don't get me wrong, but the power charges don't do anything. And after these 6 points here, we have the problem, as always with Hero, we don't know where to get our points. So this is kind of like only half good, and the last 2 points are garbage, right? But the 4 points that really matter are these here. #1, Pursuit of Faith. Placement speed, really, really good. +1 number of summon totems doesn't really do much because we're already capped, right? And we couldn't really leverage that too much against anything else. The big payoff, as always, is Ritual of Awakening. So this node is also not as good as in a hit build, for example, right? But Ritual of Awakening, yeah, this is all obviously a superstar. But if we look at this, if we have 7 totems, this gives us 35% more damage and some regen, right? So now we kind of analyze this and we see there's not that much going on here. And the #1 part about going Elementalist is actually Shaper of Flames. And it's not because of the 25% more damage or all damage can ignite. It's actually because of your hits always ignite. Now I want to preface this before I'm confusing you. Getting chance to ignite on a skill that doesn't inherently have chance to ignite is actually really rough if you're not a Hierophant. If you, for example, look at Hierophant, you get 0 chance to ignite. Now let's look for chance to ignite on the tree, right? It's actually very uncommon to actually get it. You have 20% here, right? You have a total of 30% here, which would be completely out of the way, right? You were not here, so we don't get the 10% here or the 15% here. We do get 10% here, and we could maybe, if we sacrifice like 5 points, also go here and get another 35%, which would still not get us anywhere to capped, and we need 100%. So then maybe we would have to go like something like Combustion, right? Let's actually put it in the main links so you can see what I mean. So we would maybe actually have to go for something like Combustion. And if you look at Combustion, it only gives us 19% more damage, whereas a Deadly Ailments would give us like 30 to 35% more damage, depending on levels, right? If we put this to 20, this would give us like 34. So just being Hierophant already costs us this support link. It also like costs us having to go for all this chance to ignite. So this is actually a huge deal that I personally wasn't aware, since I'm so used to just going Elementalist on Ignite. But yeah, it's huge. So yeah, this node, #1 sell. #2 sell, even if you can get to 100% chance to ignite on a Hierophant, for example. The problem is you would have to respec at somewhere around like level 70 or level 80 even, right? You have to get here while also getting here, and here. That looks like a lot of points, right? Because we're starting in the witch area. It's kind of harsh, right? You cannot really do this. And if you take Shaper of Flames, you can literally start this after your first Ascendancy, right? You take these points and you're good to go. Now at the start, you can still go Cremation if you want to, right? Sure. But it is a possibility, and that was huge for us. Next up, we have Mastermind of Discord. So your exposure inflicts another -25 resistances. Now, usually I'm not a huge fan of this node because it only applies if you throw like your Wave of Conviction, which is going to be like only at bosses. Most people only expose at bosses with like a secondary skill. But in this build, every target will get exposed. So every target gets this negative. So I absolutely love Mastermind of Discord. It's like 25 to 30% more damage depending on the target. And then we have Heart of Destruction, which is something a lot of people don't like. I will tell you that in a Ballista build, this is actually a lot better than in a non-Ballista build. And the reason for that is that you only get convergence when you hit an enemy. So basically what would happen a lot of the times, right? If you have a Heart of Destruction on a self-cast build, for example, whenever you hit like a random unique that you don't really want, you lose your 60% AoE while clearing, for example, a Beyond Demon or something, right? You lose the 60% AoE, which feels horrible. It applies to like your prolif, it applies to your initial explosion of the explosive arrow, right, to everything. So you don't want to have that. You only want to have the 30% more damage at bosses. So you can just choose to not hit those uniques, and your ballistas will have the 60% AoE at always. And then at bosses, you can perfectly time when you get this buff. And at the end here, we have a decision to make. Right now, I'm going for Shaper of Storms. Now we also have some shock effect with the Ash, Frost, and Storm. So this is around about 17% more damage. Nothing really more to it. If you have a Barracks Respite, the shocks will also proliferate, which is really, really nutty. But I will say that if you want to go more defensive, and with how much damage this build actually had in the end, even with Grace and Determination and no offensive aura, once you get better gear, I think you want to go Bastion of Elements just to shore up those weaknesses against elemental damage, right? Because we're really good against physical hits, we're really good against spells, we're really good against small hits because we have evasion, right? But if there's like big attack LE damage, right? Like added LE damage in maps, this will help out a lot. So definitely something to reconsider, and probably something I will take in the future once I get better gear. Now, as for itemization, number one thing I want to always point out here is that item prices at the end of the league where I'm testing right now are not the same as on Leaguestart. So if you actually want to be faithful, you have to go to PoE Antiquary or like PoE Ninja and actually look what these cost at Leaguestart, right? So that's what we did here. And we went for around about 4 to 5 exalts, somewhere in there. If you know how to craft, it's going to be more like 3 to 4 exalts, but I'll just put it at 4 to 5 exalts right here. Now, as for bow, we actually have a 6-link short bow. Now, this, as a lot of the Toxic Rain players out there already know, this is not a coincidence. You can get this one pretty easily with Porcupines at Leaguestart. These usually cost around about 8 chaos. So you can buy these up times 6, it's going to be like 48 chaos. And after you have that, you'll need around about 5 to 8 Shrieking Essences of Dread to get this into an okay state. As you can see here, I do not have +3. I only have the +2. I did not hit +1 because it would be too expensive. The +1 is actually on average 30, I think, essences, 30 Shrieking Essences of Dread. And what this essence does is it gives you +2 to level of socketed bow gems. Do not use Screamings because it only gives +1. And do not use Deafenings also because upgrading this does not give you anything. It's still +2. And there's another distinct advantage from getting it from the Porcupine cards. It's that it's item level 50. And this can roll the +1, which is the most important roll to get. And it will discard a lot of the higher tier modifiers that you actually don't want. And all we did on here is we hit attack speed and nothing else. The lightning damage is nice, right? Because it activates elemental equilibrium, but we could have just gotten that on any gear piece. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have to be on the bow, right? Crit chance doesn't do anything for us, but having the attack speed on means we can now craft Fire Dot Multi. Now let's move on to the helmet, where we actually have a helmet chant. A lot of people don't like having helmet chants on your league starters. I don't really mind, honestly, because these are absurdly easy to get. This is an off-meta skill. Now, if this gets meta, it's not that big of a deal, because if we subtract the 15% attack speed, I think we actually only need 5% of those 15%. So you can also get the lower tier one with 10%. It's actually not that big of a deal. It's not hard to replace at all. We would actually prefer the 40% increased damage over it. Like I said, those are usually inexpensive, but if they get expensive, don't worry, it makes almost no difference. Now, as for items, we want like accuracy, spell suppression, both really nice, right? Life, so basically all you do here is either you can chaos spam, which you usually shouldn't do. What you should do is you should use, I don't have it here, but basically the lower version of the Shrieking Essence of Greed, the Screaming Essence of Greed. Now then we have the Quiver, which is pretty bad, but the thing is, it has the implicit, right? The influence has nothing to do here. There's no influence mods here. I didn't want to hit anything. It was just, the league was kind of dead, so I had to buy some kind of 2-point arrow quiver, just a base, right? And we got like shitty life, a little bit of res, and elemental damage with attacks, with a spot to craft attack speed. The way I made these was with Essences of Woe, basically. So these give elemental damage with attack skills to quivers, which is huge, right? So you just spam these until you get anything like remotely good, and you're done. It is, however, important that you get the implicit with 30% global accuracy rating, because this build is extremely accuracy starved. Moving on, the Emmy. Now, I had to buy this one, which is actually pretty good, but the thing is the maximum energy shield and the mana regen do nothing for this build. We're actually life tap, so both, and we are not energy shield, so both of these do nothing. We basically just have lightning res, life, and strength, right? And then we have a spot for elemental damage with attacks to craft. As for the rest of our jewelry, we're basically just fixing resistances on this one. I would like to get elemental damage with attacks. If you have the budget for it, go for it. Now, Death's Rush is basically just there. Now, you might ask, if you know totem builds, you might ask, why aren't we just using a medium cluster jewel, right? You get Sleeping Sentries, and whenever you place a totem, you get Onslaught. But in the end, the problem with this tree was, when we reworked it, to get to everything we need, Watchtowers, right? Here, Ironwood and Panopticon, stretching there, getting here, right? It was too many points. We would have to sacrifice life, which we didn't want to in the end. I think we ended up at a pretty good place for level 92. So we weren't really able to fit in those cluster jewels at all. So that's basically why I just decided to go for Death's Rush. Now in this POB, Onslaught is not ticked, just to be clear, right? This attack rate that we have, that we need, is there even if we don't tick Onslaught, just to be clear. So this is only just for clearing, getting a little bit of movement speed. This ring is just really, really nice overall. It gives us accuracy, armor, life, a ton of chaos rest, which we're lacking, right? And the Onslaught on top. There's nothing wrong with this ring. It's usually really cheap at Leaguestart. Just a nice addition. Now, after that, we're actually using another expensive item, which is Chaos Heart. Now, the thing about this is, depending on what's meta, this can cost from 50 up to like 80 or 90 chaos at Leaguestart. So it can get expensive. So this one alone just bumps up the build quite a bit. You can definitely go for an Astral Plate. The problem in this version of the build is just that since we're pathing so much, we don't have much opportunity to grab life. We do have a lot of opportunity to go for evasion, spell suppression, armor, right? But life in general is really hard to come by. And if you remove this chest, you're going to be sitting at quite low HPs. And then you can't really make use of your damage reductions, which is kind of a bad deal, but you can definitely go for an Astral Plate. But if you go for an Astral Plate, look that you get as much life as possible. As for gloves, pretty shitty. We got the spell suppression and life. Nothing else is relevant. You want the attack speed craft. The boots are spell suppression, movement speed, cold res. You can also get an Aziri step. And at the end here, we have Daedian Dawn. This is an absolute superstar. Right now, I don't even have the catalysts. Actually, there's catalysts that makes it even faster. But basically what this does is ignites you inflict with attacks, deal damage 35% faster, up to 42% with the catalyst. This is basically just a more multiplier. As for flask, we have a very bare bones setup. Basically, we want a life flask. If we can, we want it to be instant or semi-instant, whatever we can roll, right? With bleed and corrupted blood immunity, absolutely huge. Now, next up, the basis that we want is obviously a Quicksilver. We want a Jade and a Granite flask, both for our armor part or our evasion part, and then we want like increased armor suffix somewhere, and we want increased evasion suffix somewhere. I think the evasion is on the Amethyst flask. Now for the Amethyst flask, I just use this for mapping. It's kind of like cozy to have a little bit of chaos res on top. If you're bossing, most of the time you actually want a second life flask, because life recovery is definitely a problem. We're not hero fans, we're not getting massive regen, right? So against bosses like Cyrus, definitely sub in a second life flask right there. Now, as for gem setup, we basically have our main setup with explosive arrow. We have ignite proliferation. Now, if you have a barracks respite ring that basically proliferates, right, you can cut this because it's kind of overkill at that point. But barracks is going to be extremely expensive at Leaguestart, basically always, so not really in our budget. Ballista totem support. Then we have elemental damage with attacks. We have life tap, and we have deadly ailments. Now, life tap is just something I really like to use. If you're fine with just using inspiration and making it cheaper, good for you. I just wanted to reserve everything because we needed precision for the accuracy, right? And I just kind of came to the conclusion that losing the little bit of damage is really, really nice, especially in like no region maps and stuff. We can just place it wherever, right? It's just very cozy. It doesn't really matter. So what you might think here also is, how the hell did we get 4 off colors? And that's simply because this is a level 50. This has almost no dex requirement. So it's actually very easy to get to 4 off colors. Now, if you still can't get to 4 off colors for some reason, which shouldn't be a problem, you can replace the elemental damage with attacks with added cold damage, actually, because cold damage also ignites, right? Now, it cannot be something like Immolate, because then you would destroy your elemental equilibrium, because that's fire damage, right? But if it's cold damage, it's still fine. And all the cold damage ignites just as well as the fire damage. So then your elemental equilibrium is still going to be fine. Now, next up, we have Flame Surge in a link with Trap support and Combustion. Now, you might be a little bit surprised, right? The thing is, basically, we do not deal any damage, right? And the thing is, Flame Surge wants you to do damage, but the Burning Ground that you get is actually secondary damage. So this wouldn't negate the downside, but the initial hit is the only thing that applies Combustion. And if the initial hit deals no damage, then we don't get Combustion. So if we put it on a trap, this doesn't apply anymore because traps aren't, we do no damage. So do note that you can automate Flame Surge with Arcanist Brand, right? But that will mean that it has no initial hit and you have to somehow get Combustion elsewhere. So that's the only reason why I did that, just to explain that. We have Grace here. Grace is really, really strong, as well as Determination. I think we have it somewhere here. Determination, Defiance, Banner are basically our auras that we're going to have here. Really, really strong overall. Whereas the Precision, there it is, right? These are our 4 auras. And then in the other setup, we just have Frenzy, basically with Hex Touch and Flammability. This is obviously not necessary if you have enough currency for a good Flammability ring, right? Then this is not a problem. But we had the links, so Frenzy, Hex Touch, Flammability. Frenzy will mean you basically have perma Frenzy charges, right? Which is huge damage increase and also attack speed for your fuses. And yeah, Flammability is just good in general. Precision, huge. This build is extremely accuracy starved. Look for it in gear wherever you can. And other than that, did I forget something? Molten Shell, obviously a no-brainer in every build that has at least like 20 to 30k armor, right? And then Flame Dash as your movement skill. Now, as for the passive tree, the most important points in this passive tree are the ones that give us extra ballistas, right? So that is number 1 up here, Ancestral Bond. We can't deal any damage ourselves. +1 to number of maximum totems, which is also ballistas. We get +1 from Panopticon. Attack skills have +1 number of ballistas. And then we also get Watchtowers. Before somebody's going to ask why I'm actually pathing to Watchtowers, I could just anoint Watchtowers and skip this region maybe. That is a valid criticism. The thing is, the number 1 reason why I went here is because Watchtowers cost 2 silver oils, which can be up to like 100 C at League Start, basically increasing the budget of this build to a point where I didn't want it to. So we actually pathed here and we anointed the Divine Judgment. Now, really important at the start is Elemental Overload actually works with ballistas. They changed it in 3.16. You don't have to hit anything. The ballistas will crit at some point. They hit so often and all of them count for everyone. So if one of them crits, all of them get the buff, right? You can see this under the bar here with like a little bit of a diamond. If you see this diamond under the skill, you actually know that Elemental Overload is up, just for your info. Then we have Damage over Time Mastery here. In this cluster, we have the increased skill effect duration. If you have quality, you don't need this because quality gives you 20% duration. But since we want a 21 gem, that's going to be very hard to get with 20 quality. So we just went for 21 rather than like a 20/20 or something. Now, next up for the Fire Mastery, we did take the dot multiplier. Minus fire res is not that big of a deal. 20 dot really is, right? You definitely want the aura cluster here. Now, really important is this Totem Mastery here. Totems taunt enemies around them for 1 second when summoned. If you think about the kind of totem playstyle that's efficient, right? You move, place, and whenever you move, right, there's like this moment where enemies can actually attack you, right? Which is really annoying because you first have to put your totems down because they're in melee range, your ballistas, right? And then they have to also ignite that target, and then the fuses have to explode, right? So there's a little bit of a delay in between, which can get dangerous. But that's one of the reasons why we went more tanky. And we have this taunt here, right? So this taunt basically means that you place it here, and as soon as you place it, even though there's a delay, everything will go into that totem, leave you basically alone. So this Totem Mastery is completely busted, and it's like an absolute no-brainer. As for mandatory jewels, Reign of Splinters is super, super mandatory. Other than the league where Forbidden Right totems were huge, these usually cost around like 10 to 20 chaos. So that was kind of an outlier. Usually it's not that expensive, not that big of a deal. We go for Ash, Frost, and Storm. Here we just go for some more all-res, nothing big here. A little bit more placement speed, go through the life region here. Grab the 50 life, obviously. Go for Mage Bane. This isn't huge here. We don't have like a lot of decks, but it's still good enough to take for a point. Reflexes is huge, so we're basically trying to cap our spell suppression. If you don't, you can reconsider these points. If you want to go more squishy, go for it, right? Really important is we only really have access to 1 bow mastery, and that bow mastery should always be chance to gain phasing for 4 seconds on kill, 8% increased movement speed while phasing. Now, as I pointed out at the start, this actually counts for totem kills if the kills were by an ignite or like a damage over time in general. They actually count as you. So whenever totems kill something with your ignite, which is always, you get phasing. Now, up here, we just take this wheel, which is huge. Do not neglect Ironwood. I will just say this. Late game, if you don't have this 30 auras on your totems, they go from 40 to 70 auras, right? Which is insane. If you don't have this, your ballistas will melt. This is super important. Also gives you a little bit of armor, which is cute, right? And on the right side here, we pathed through the spell suppression and ended here at Watchtowers. As for leveling, until you get to Explosive Arrow, which is level 28, where you can theoretically start playing it, you will want Purifying Flame, Holy Flame Totem, and Flame Wall. Purifying Flame is level 1. Holy Flame Totem and Flame Wall are level 4 skills. You want to take these to whatever level you want to respec. Now, I think I respec at like level 32 once we reach Blood Aqueducts. Whenever you can do your first Ascendancy, we'll talk about that in a second. But you're starting out as a caster, right? So what you want to do is you want to go here. Now, this is always different. Like some people like to go for cast speed. Spell damage will be more damage, but I like the comfiness of having better cast speed. Cast move, right? Then we go up here. So everything's fire damage. So we go through Firewalker all the way up here, right? This is a ton of like outwards damage that you have at the start. So you don't really have to worry about damage in the League Start scenario, which is huge. But we go even further, which is all stuff that we will respec later, which is no big deal. We actually also go for Heart of Flame up there. You don't need anything here because we're not Ignite, right? And after that, basically what you do is you go to Elemental Overload, which at the start, you're not a crit build. This is going to be up sometimes. It's still worth a point because when it's up, it's huge. Now, if you want to, you can also go for Mental Rapidity, but only go for Mental Rapidity if you plan on not going Explosive Arrow anytime soon. I will explain here. If you want to go Cremation, Armageddon brand, level 28, all the way up to maps, right? It's always an easy time, right? Watch a racing video. There's a lot of them out there. I will tell you how to start going with Explosive Arrow as soon as possible. So we don't want these points, even though they would be good right now. We're level 22 right now. We're almost where we could play Explosive Arrow, so we don't want free points we then have to respec, right? Because we're not going to have that many respec points at League Start. So we start going up here, and we basically want to go to Ancestral Bond as fast as possible. Now, obviously, we don't take it until we actually go Ballistas, because otherwise we do no damage, just to point that out. Now, at this point, just this alone, and that's also a reason why I went all the way up to Heart of Flame, these points will completely carry you. Even though you don't get any damage throughout here, you can now take the time, you're like level 24, and actually just go ahead and take these aura nodes first, right? So you take the aura nodes first, get some mana reservation. Now you can go like Purity plus, I don't know, whatever you want, right? And now you're at level 29, so you can respec immediately. I like to wait until I actually get this cluster going, and I get the mastery with the Nearby Totems Taunt. This one here will make it super easy. So at this point, you're at level 32. Yeah, this is exactly where I respect. And basically what you're going to do is you're going to have a 4-link with Explosive Arrow, Ballista support, right? Definitely look into leveling the Ballista totem support in your offhand. And then you want 2 support gems. And those will unfortunately have to be something that gives you more procs. It has to be faster attacks, right? You would love to get a more multiplier, but this is basically a more multiplier. You want faster attacks. This will make it feel better. It will give you more fuses. It's huge at the start. We can obviously later it's useless. And until we have Rain of Splinters, which is going to be like at the earliest at like level 70 or level 80, right? We actually go for lesser multiple projectiles, and later once you get level 38 or something, GMP, right? Greater multiple projectiles. But this is needed because otherwise the clear is just kind of dog shit. Now you can obviously also replace this with something like elemental damage with attacks if you want to. I would still recommend this. It's really nice throughout the acts. Now, next up, we're not going to respec much here. We're going to do it once we have more points. So we basically want to respec these points as fast as possible because they're kind of bad. So at this point, you probably have like 6 refund points, right? But before you can use those, what you will do over the next levels is connect here, right? And now what you will do is remove, and also here, right? And what you will do now is remove all those really bad spell damage and cast speed nodes that you have nothing to do with, right? You can keep these for now. You're not going to have more respec points, right? We just used 6, but this is basically going to be it. And once you have enough points, you want to respec all of this here. But next up, we're just going to go down here. And you definitely want to go Ash, Frost, and Storm. You might be confused. You might be thinking, I want to get here as fast as possible, but these nodes are just too good. They also give you all-res, and you can, even if you want to, go for the all-res mastery, which is always huge at the start. Then you go down here, go through here. Now, if you want more placement speed, it depends on your gear, right? Maybe you need it, maybe you don't. You can grab it if you want to. I don't think I think I went for it because it also gives attack speed, right? Nothing about spell suppression is important right now. What we want to do now is we want to go down here as fast as possible to Panopticon. So we connect down here. Now you can take Art of the Gladiator. It's actually really, really strong. You might also be wondering, we're kind of low on life. So if at any point you feel too squishy, right, you can always take like Purity of Flesh here, or like a 2-pointer Bravery here. I'm just doing the bare bones here. Now, next up, I don't think it's really that good to go for Deadly Draw here. You can, though, because you will get the phasing early. Let's just pretend like we do. And at this point, we're around about level 56. Now, let's talk about Ascendancies real quick. I kind of forgot that. First up, you want Shaper of Flames. Absolutely no-brainer. As the second mod, you always want Mastermind of Discord. And this is the latest where you actually want to get your elemental equilibrium rolling, right? So that means that you cannot have anger or anything, or any fire damage at all. No like prism weave, no nothing, right? No fire damage, but you have to have one source of either lightning or cold damage somewhere, right? And then you can use this, right? Which is just insane for leveling. It's like minus 50 resistances, these two together, right? So that's huge. And then we go further down, right? And we go through Golem's Blood. And now we're here, and you take all of the points. Now, Ironwood, you can delay a little bit. At the start, it won't be that big of a deal if your totems die, but it's just kind of nice to have for 2 points. Now, once we have this, once again, check if you feel squishy. You can always fill in some life, but if you don't, you definitely want to go for Finesse here. Now, you can go for Quick Step. You get some movement speed. The spell suppression is kind of useless at this point. You can also go here straight away. I didn't really mind going for Quick Step, so it should be fine. You go here, Herbalism, and at level what? Level 79, you have all your totems together. And at this point, you're just filling out the rest of the points that we had, right? You have a jewel here. You have 2 1-point jewels. You should really use this real quick. And now we can also respec all of these points, right? Like this. These are all basically useless. And now you start filling in some of the damage over time multiplier. You can definitely go for Holy Fire earlier. Maybe I did it too late, right? If you want to, you can definitely have the dot multiplier earlier. That's really, really strong. You probably should actually. I kind of forgot that. Other than that, you can fill in Heavy Draw. I don't really. And at this point, you can just go for Spell Suppression depending on how squishy you feel. Now, do note that Spell Suppression gets better the more you have, kinda, because otherwise it's a little bit unstable. If you don't have a 100% chance to Spell Suppress, it will be similar to Dodge, where sometimes you just get one shot for no reason, right? Which is kind of weird. So try to get it on gear as soon as possible. You can also fill out the jewels if you have some good deals going. But yeah, that's basically it for the leveling. As for items while leveling, I used a few leveling items. Number one, until you have 6 totems, you can actually use Skirmish. This is huge, right? Until you get an actual like good or semi-good quiver, having the extra totem is no problem at all. It just means that you have more fuses, right? It's really nice. The problem about this quiver is that you have nothing else. All the mana or int is completely useless on this build, but it also has a good implicit. It has the 30% global accuracy rating. So we'll say you can use Skirmish as much as you want and as long as you want. As for this bow, until you have the roundabout 80 chaos to actually make this bow, right, we used Lionized Glare, which can be a little bit awkward. In this version, it's actually fine on the dex. You have to like get a little bit more dex, but you should be all right. And before then, we bought a very early Stormcloud. Now, do note, this is not the upgraded version, just a normal one, which is like 1 Alch to 1 Chaos at Leaguestart, right? You definitely want a Stormcloud. As much attack speed as possible, but obviously beggars can't be choosers. And at the start, this also gives you lightning damage to later activate your elemental equilibrium, so you don't have to get it anywhere, which is pretty nice. Now, other than that, I think I used the Tabula. Yeah, I used the Tabula until I got a Chaos Heart. Don't invest into a +2. You're going to have Chaos Heart pretty quickly. And usually +2 and Chaos Heart will be in a very similar price range. And I would definitely say that if you can grab like a 5-link bow, until you can get this, I would first go Chaos, so you get a little bit more tankier, so you get more levels, and go with a 5-link for now. And later then go into crafting this bow. Now at the end here, at the conclusion, you might have already guessed it. I'm a Ballista dude. I'm a bow guy. This is by far the nicest playstyle out of the 3 I've played so far. Wintertide brand has really good clear, very similar to this actually, but the single target is kind of lacking. So it's kind of a turn off for me unless you really want to go cold dot. Explosive trap, really high single target. Also really good defensiveness for a trapper, but kind of lacks in clear speed. This one here is kind of the best of both worlds. I love it. I absolutely love this playstyle, as you could have seen throughout the gameplay that I shared. Cyrus Awakener 8, once again, is linked down in the description. If you want to look at it, we did it on stream. I'm going to link the timestamp. But yeah, overall, this build was fantastic. You just have to know how to craft a short bow. So if you haven't already checked out the item section, I explained it there real quick. This has basically nothing on it, right? You can make this way better. Overall, this build has also the advantage of having so much upgrade potential. Like, we're not even talking about a whole cluster setup, right? Which will probably give you like 50% more damage. We're also talking like getting +1 gems here and maybe a higher dot multi roll, right? There is like dot multi on everything, right? Dot multi on top of the spell suppression here. There's no dot multi on anything. Getting more levels. There's just so much to do still here. Getting faster ignite boots. It's actually crazy. So I'm really looking forward to this. So far, this is my #1 pick for League Starter. We'll see how it goes. Obviously, take this enchant with a grain of salt. If you want to remove it for the POB, that's fine with me, because you never know what's gonna be like meta next league. Sure, but yeah. Other than that, that's it for me. I hope you liked the presentation here. Once again, not a build guide. I'm just testing stuff out, and I absolutely love my time with this build. But that's it for the video. If you liked it, give it a thumbs up, and if you haven't already, subscribe. As always, a huge shout out to my Twitch subscribers and my Patreons. I couldn't do stuff like this without you. Thank you so much for the support. And yeah, absolutely love this build. This is my #1 choice for what I will right now play for League Start. We just have to wait for the patch notes, right? And overall, I feel like a lot of people like this series, so I might continue it next league. Some people obviously don't like testing before 3.17. I think I made it pretty clear that these are not build guides, and I will update them. But the problem is just that I cannot get anything in after the patch notes, right? After the patch notes are out, there's like no time to test anything. So I have to kind of preload this. I hope you enjoyed this series. I will probably do one more, but we'll see on that. Since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.